Hi, my name is David Bergvinson, and for the June 29th, 2021 edition of the World Weather Watcher, we're going to be looking at temperature and rainfall anomalies around the world to see how they're impacting our forests and our farms. Over the last 30 days, we've been talking a lot about precipitation anomalies, especially in the western part of the United States, where it's been drier than normal, while it's also been drier than normal in the northern part of South America, the central part of Africa, especially DRC, as well as all along Southeast Asia, as well as in Europe, wetter than normal conditions in the central part of Europe, while southern part, such as Italy, experiencing drier than normal conditions. When we look to the Pacific Northwest of the United States, especially southwestern Washington state, we see that rainfall normally would be much higher for the past 3 months than it has been. This gold line here is the long-term normal over the last 15 years. The blue bars indicate weekly rainfall that's actually materialized the last 3 months. And we can see that it's much below the long-term normal, resulting in conditions that are very conducive to wildfires, especially when we couple this to the very high temperatures that the western part of the United States and Canada have experienced. Now, when we go over to Ukraine, we see the opposite, where rainfall has been well above the long-term normal for this part of Europe, meaning that crops will not only have sufficient moisture, but in some cases actually be flooded. When we look to the forecast for the next 15 days, we see that precipitation is going to continue to be below normal for much of the central part of the United States, much of Mexico, as well as now the northern part of South America, much of Africa drier than normal, with the exception of parts of the Sahel, and drier than normal conditions for the western part of India, as well as parts of China. Europe is going to be experiencing wetter than normal conditions for the central part of Europe, but then drier than normal conditions for the southern part of Europe. When we look to maximum temperature the last 30 days, we've been seeing some spectacular differences from long-term normal. Here we see along the northern part of the United States, temperatures in the range of 6 to 11 degrees Celsius warmer than normal, which is amazing. When we look to the central part of Africa, we see also warmer than normal conditions, as well as warmer than normal conditions for an already hot region of the Middle East, much of Europe, as well as the east and west parts of Russia. When we look to the next 15 days, though, this is only going to intensify as we see extremely warm conditions well above normal for much of Canada, as well as the northern part of the United States, the west coast, central part of Africa and southern Africa, the northern part of India, and also the Middle East, extending all the way up through into Kazakhstan, much warmer than normal, ranging from 5 to 10 degrees above normal. When we look to the critical ratio of precipitation over potential evapotranspiration, which for agriculture is a key index for indicating when a plant will be under stress, with crops such as maize or corn being under water stress starting at around 0.8, the straw color on this map. We see that for much of the western part of the United States, dry conditions that will cause some water stress for crops, as well as the last 30 days have been actually offering relief to farmers in the southern part of Brazil, where coffee plantations will have actually received enough water to resuscitate them. There was concern that we would be losing coffee in that part of the world due to drought. We also see that last 30 days, rainfall has started along the Sahel, which is great news for farmers in the region, as well as the eastern part of India, indicating the start of the monsoon season. We see a mixture of dry conditions for agriculture along the southern part of Europe, but good conditions along the central part of Europe for rain-fed agriculture. When we zoom into sugarcane producing areas of Thailand, we see that 8 out of the 9 weeks have been drier than normal, and so this is really a concern during the critical time of the sugarcane plantations in Thailand. So we could see below normal production for sugarcane in this part of the world. When we look to the forecast for a ratio of P over PET, we see that the drying trend is extending into the central part of the United States, the South American region. So we saw that it was sufficient moisture in southern Brazil, but now that is not the case in the forecast. It's too dry. And we also see that in the Sahel region, extending all the way over into central Ethiopia, that conditions are conducive in the forecast for rain-fed agriculture, as is the case for much of India, which is great news for smallholder farmers. When we zoom into northwestern United States and western Canada, we see that this critical ratio is well below what's required to not only sustain agriculture, but also to mitigate the risk of forest fire. And you can see that it's extremely dry all the way along the western part of the United States, but especially the coastal areas of Canada, the United States, all the way down into Northern California. So this area is a real high risk for forest fires in the coming weeks. When we look to the difference of P over PET for this part of the world, we see that it is much drier than normal all the way along the west coast of the United States into central British Columbia, the central part of Canada, Manitoba, all the way over to Quebec, much drier than normal from an agriculture perspective, as is the case for the northern part of the United States. When we look to precipitation in the forecast, and we look to the anomaly compared to long-term normal, we see that precipitation all the way from central part of Texas up through into the Appalachians is very high, therefore risk of flooding and potentially landslides, but also that rainfall is much above the long-term normal, shown here in this map. The areas in blue, well above normal rainfall, in some cases about 100 millimeters above normal. Precipitation anomaly for the last 30 days, comparing that to precipitation anomalies for the last 7 days, we see that it's a very different picture when we zoom into a narrower time period. In the 30 days, we see a mosaic where generally dry conditions, much drier than normal in the western part of Canada, the United States, while we see wetter than normal conditions along the northern parts of Canada and down through the southern parts of the United States, from Texas extending all the way into the southern part of Florida. But when we zoom into just 1 week, the last week of rainfall, we see that it's this corridor from the northern part of Mexico extending up through into northern Texas and into Ohio, and then extending all the way through to Ontario and Quebec. That is a band that of precipitation that is much higher than normal, while we see across the western part of Canada and the northern parts of the United States much drier than normal. When I look to the weather for myself the last week, we actually had a very intense rainfall event on the weekend, and this resulted in a lot of flooding damage. Our drainage systems were overwhelmed and flowing into creeks that were then carrying debris with the heavy rain, and as a result, some damage occurred. And it points to the need for increasing our infrastructure and taking into account weather analytics to adjust for increased severe rainfall events, as we just experienced this past weekend here in Denver. So this is where we live, and we also have a farm just north of us that we work with friends to produce vegetables for food banks. And we noticed that rainfall events were actually more severe when we look at total rainfall on this map. Where we live and our farm that we cultivate actually had higher rainfall events than surrounding areas. And the value that we pulled off of our weather data was around 62 millimeters, and the rain gauge that I have at my home was 65 millimeters. So really alarming that we can have that much rain in such a short period of time, but also assuring us that the accuracy of our weather data is good to support local decisions, such as when we can go up to the farm to do operations like hilling potatoes, as we did this weekend. If analytics like this are of interest to you, I invite you to go to our adapter platform at apps.aware.com, where you can register for free to start your weather analytics journey. Until next week, take care.